Hello everyone, my name is Mike Cook. I'm a procedural generation researcher, and this is a tool I've been working on called Danesh. It's designed to help people interact with, explore, understand, and improve procedural generators. And it's aimed both at expert users who want to get the most out of a system they've made themselves, and also newcomers who want to learn a bit about what a generator is and how you can change one to suit your own personal goals and objectives. Danesh is just in the prototype stages right now, so the walkthrough I'm going to show you today is just of the first few features I've implemented, but I wanted to show you the actual tool because writing about it only conveys so much, and I thought it would be much more interesting if I showed you what it actually did. If you do want to read a little bit about the tool, you can go to www.gamesbyangelina.org. And I just realized I wrote www there, like this is a 1995 children's TV program, but not to worry. So this is Danesh, and when you start the tool up, it's built inside Unity. So obviously not everyone wants to use Unity, and this is just the platform that I built it on, but hopefully we'll be able to get the tools and ideas inside Danesh into other platforms. But for now, it's a Unity thing, so we open up Unity, we ask for a new Danesh window, and this thing pops up, and this is an editor tool, so it's not like a scene in a game or whatever, it slots into any project. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to choose which generator we want to instrument. Now, I'm just going to show you the generator that we're going to be looking at today. This is only going to be a short demo, but this is one of the sample generators that comes with Danesh. It's called a cellular automata generator, and it's a generation technique that's used for making kind of cave-like structures. It makes nice organic-looking sort of dungeon-y shapes, as we'll see in a minute. And what I've done here is I've written a level generating method, and the only thing I've needed to do is to tag it with an attribute called map generator. So it's just this little word in square brackets. And what that means is that in a minute when I load this generator into Danesh, Danesh is going to automatically find this method. Now at the moment it produces maps, so the only thing that Danesh can display is maps, but the next feature that I'm implementing will allow us to completely generalize that, so don't worry about that too much for now. But the point is that you've written your generator, maybe you found it online, the only thing you really need to do is very little. You just need to add a couple of lines to let Danesh understand that it's there. So let's try loading in our cellular automata generator. And when I load it in and click setup, you'll see a bunch of things are going to change on the screen. So in the middle, it's actually going to show us the output from this generator. You can see that it's currently set up to make these kind of nice, if you imagine the white as empty space and the black as walls, it's sort of these kind of nice dungeony areas, or if you imagine a 2D Spelunky-like level, I would imagine running around here, I think that would be quite cool. And on the right-hand side, you can see it's added in all of these parameters, things like the initial spawn chance, number of iterations. You might be thinking, what's all of this? Well, Danesh has actually found these in the generator code. So these are variables that someone's written down. So this is the chance that a tile will initially be solid in the generator. You don't need to know what that is. It's completely specific to this generator. But what you can do is, again, just like with the map generator attribute, you can add a single line of code above the parameter. And it just gives Danesh a little bit of information. It says this is something that you can change to change how the generator looks. So the minimum value for this is going to be 0.2. The maximum value is going to be 0.5. And to make it look a bit nicer, this is what you should call it inside the tool, initial spawn chance. And Danesh goes through and it finds all of these and it displays them here. And I can drag these sliders to change the generator. So I'm going to increase the initial density, and you can see that the map suddenly becomes much more dense. And if I reduce it, then the map becomes much more open because there's less rocks being put in initially, less solid space. So this is very easy. This is almost what you already have in Unity if these fields are public. You can change the numbers and see what the outcome is. You press the button a few times, whatever. So this is fine, and maybe we find a particular version of the generator that we really like. So I kind of like that one that was a bit more open. There was a bit more open space for things to happen. So I can save this as something. It generates random names. That's a bit of a weird one. So we'll call this Open Dungeon and save it. And I can load that later on in case I fiddle with it a bit and I want to go back to it. So that's the first thing that Danesh does. It just lets you see what your generator's doing and play around with it. And sometimes that might be enough. You might actually just think, oh, well, I just needed to change a few parameters and suddenly the whole thing makes sense. But sometimes that's not enough. And I'm going to write another blog post about this soon. But the next thing that you can do in Danesh is use metrics, use some kind of score to tell you something about the thing that your generator is producing. Now, Danesh comes with a few metrics designed to evaluate maps. So you can see them here on the left-hand side. One of them is called connectedness, one of them is density, and one of them is openness. And the randomness one is just a random number. That's for debugging. So to give you an idea of what a metric might be, these are just three ideas that I came up with for thinking about these maps. So connectedness, for instance, tells us what percentage of the map is one large accessible room. So you can see in this map there's a few small rooms which are inaccessible from each other. And what I want this number to be quite high. I want this to be near 1 or 100%, because that means that the player can reach the whole level from any other point in the level, which is really important. And density and openness just tell us a little bit about how much solid space there is and how much open space there is in the level. They're not exactly opposites, but they're kind of related. They're just different ways of thinking about the level. And you can see that every time I click generate, hopefully if the quality of the video is high enough, you can see that these numbers are changing, they're updating, and they're telling you what value these metrics have for this level. And the way you can think about this is, imagine that this generator is an artist or a musician or a programmer that you've hired to do a job for you. The parameters are kind of very vague things that you're describing about what you want them to do. You're telling them that you want them to start off using oil paints or something, but you don't tell them what you actually want them to draw a painting of. The metrics are things that you're telling them about the output of the generator. You're saying the generator's output, tell me something about how claustrophobic it is, or tell me something about how much treasure there is in it, or tell me something about how many colors you used in the output. So the generator parameters are useful because they give you control over the generator. But the metrics are, I think, eventually they'll become a more accessible way of thinking about generators, because they allow people to talk about generators in terms of what they see on the screen, rather than talking about generators in terms of the code. Sometimes the parameters have a very close connection to the output of a generator, but sometimes it's much further away. And you can see here that changing depth limit, for instance, from 2 to 4, and birth limit to 5, generates completely indistinguishable maps. And that's because these rules have very unusual effects on how the code computes things. You can see now the edges of all the maps are very jagged, because I've fiddled with the death and birth limits. And that might not be an effect that you want. And it's hard to understand what depth limit is doing unless you've written the code yourself. And sometimes, even if you've written the code yourself, you won't actually know what any of it means. So writing metrics is a little bit complicated, I think, because you need to know what you're looking for. So to give you an idea, here's one metric. It's not too long, but I had to think about why I wanted to measure density. And that'll be something that we have to come across in future tutorials and future discussions about what Danesh is. I'm hoping that we can do a bit of cool computational creativity in the metrics department. So let's say that you've got your metrics in place already. Let's pretend that we've solved that problem already, and that the user feels comfortable with their metrics, maybe that they've already written some extra ones of their own to express something about the generator. Now what that lets you do is, it lets you press generate content, and it lets you look at the metrics and think about whether this is right, and maybe change the numbers until the metrics come out just the way you want them to. But the problem with this is that this still isn't giving you a good idea of what the generator's doing. So sometimes the connectedness might be very high, and other times it might be very low. It might be just really difficult to predict. If I turn the spawn chance up a bit, these ones are kind of 0.8, then there's one that's 0.4. So it's changing from there being like one massive chamber that the player can access everything in to being lots of different islands that are broken up from each other. And you have no idea which one the generator is going to produce at any one time. And that makes this particular version of the generator really unpredictable. And if only there was some way of capturing that, right? We would want a way of describing this unpredictability-ness, or allowing the user to see what it is. And one of the ways that you can do that in Danesh is to perform an expressive range analysis. So what this is doing here, I want you to imagine that I've taken the time to put nice axes labels here, which I actually don't have right now. But I want you to imagine that along the x-axis, it's got connectedness from 0 to 1. So 1 means that there is just one chamber, one dungeon that the player can run around in, and there is no like dead ends or locked away sections of the map. And like very low connectedness, I can't imagine 0 connectedness, but like very low connectedness means the whole map is just a series of very small rooms which aren't connected to each other at all, and it's just completely broken up. and you'd need like a teleporter or a pickaxe to get through. And you can see each one of these points along, like plotted on this sort of histogram here, is one result from the generator. So when we pressed this button here, it ran the generator 250 times, and every time it ran it, it recorded the metric values that it got. It wrote down what the connectedness was, what the density was, what the openness was. And on the y-axis here, you can see I've selected density here. So at the top, a point up here would be very high density. It would almost be a completely full level, just solid rock. And at the bottom, 0 would be a completely open level, so no rock or walls at all. And what you can see here is that most of the levels are relatively dense. They're about 0.7, 0.8 density. But there's a big spread of connectedness here. It goes from being very broken up maps to being almost entirely connected. And you might be thinking to yourself, this is the opposite of what I wanted. What I wanted was all the connectedness points to be up here. I wanted all of the points from the expressive range to appear here. And you can actually see that if I change the spawn chance, if I turn it down and I perform another expressive range analysis, so what it's doing now is it's running the generator 250 times, and it's writing down the values of the metrics every time it runs it, and then it's plotting it on a histogram. And we've changed the initial amount of rock down, and what you'll see is now all the points are collecting on the right-hand side of the map. And you can also see that the points have moved down a bit. So not only is the map less dense, but it's also more connected. And we'll talk a bit about why that's interesting too, probably in a later tutorial or video, because I don't want this video to run too long. But it might imply that there's a connection between these two metrics that you might not have realized before, but that's not important. What's important is that by changing this value, we've suddenly changed where the generator is outputting, what kind of output the generator is producing. It's producing output that's clumped together in a much smaller part of the state space. All of these maps have very high connectedness, which is great. And there are a few stragglers, but on the whole, most of them are on the connected end of the spectrum. And we can see I press generate content. The first one that came up is 100% accessible. Every point on the map is accessible from every other point. And you can see this one is almost 100%. This one is very, very nearly 100%, much higher than before. So the expressive range analysis is really useful because it shows you what the spread of the output of your generator is. And sometimes you write a generator and every single time it produces what you want. But sometimes you don't know what it's going to produce. They can be very unpredictable. Now, suppose we go back to this expressive range analysis, and instead of thinking about where we currently are, why don't we try and imagine where the generator could possibly be? So these kind of maps are sitting in this part of the histogram, but what about if there was a generator that produced maps in this part of the histogram, or this part up here in the top right, or over here on the opposite side of the histogram? Is it actually possible for the generator to do that? Well, another thing that Danesh can do is perform a random expressive range analysis. I'm going to turn down the size of this one so that it's not, it doesn't take forever. Now, what Danesh is doing here is actually going a bit beyond what we've seen so far. Instead of taking the parameters as they're set, what it's actually doing is it's randomly changing the values of all of these parameters here. And each time it randomly changes it, it takes a few snapshots, it generates a bit of content and looks at the results. And it plots them on the histogram again. So now, instead of seeing what the generator is doing with our current parameters, now what we're seeing is all the possible different random results that you could get from changing these values. And what you can see is that there's quite a lot of data over here on the kind of bottom right-hand side of the histogram. And there's quite a bit of data on the left-hand side near the top. But there's almost no data down here at all. There is almost no data for these in this kind of area. And what that might tell us is that it's not actually possible for our generator to produce maps that have those kind of low connectedness, low density values. Which to me is very interesting. And it might be really interesting to you because you might have been sat here all day long trying to change these numbers, trying to get your generator to produce maps with very low connectedness and very low density, or maybe very high openness and very high density, which doesn't make much sense, but maybe you were looking in that direction anyway. And Danesh can actually tell you, look, I've got a strong feeling that that isn't possible. I've randomly tested loads and loads. I've randomly tested 500 different generator configurations, and I actually don't think you can do it. And this could save people a lot of time. And I was really pleased with these, and I really like looking at the random expressive range histograms because I think they tell you a lot about what the generator can do. And I'm hoping to do a lot more with expressive range histograms in the future once I've got a really good tutorial that explains what they actually are and how they actually work, because it's quite a new concept for a lot of people, I think. Before I go, I just want to show one last thing that Danesh can do. Let's suppose that we've sat here for a while and we've looked at these histograms, we've changed the parameters, we've tried to get our generator to do a particular thing. Let's say we want quite high openness and a sort of medium density. We want it to be over here, but we just can't get it there for some reason, as much as we tried. Well, what we can do is we can just ask Danesh to do it for us. So if we check the only metrics we're interested in, and let's say we want 0.4 density and 0.7 openness. Let's turn that down a bit. Instead of just trying to change these parameters, instead of thinking about it in terms of what the input to the system is, we can describe what we want in terms of the output. We can tell Danesh what we want from the result of the generator, and then we can just ask it to go and find it for us. And Danesh will start searching to find parameter settings that result in the kinds of output that we want. Now this can take a long time, or it can be very quick, so I'm probably going to cut here to the output. Okay, we're back. For full disclosure, that took about 3.5 minutes. Sometimes it's incredibly quick, and sometimes it can take a little bit longer. Obviously, this is just a prototype, so we'll be working a lot on performance of that in particular in the coming months. Just wanted to show you the output of that result. So we asked to have density at about 0.3 and openness at about 0.7. And as I click generate, you can see this one has a density of 0.3 and an openness of 0.69. Sometimes this one's gone up to 0.34 density or down to 0.67 openness. But you can see it's kind of in the right area. And we can confirm this actually by doing one final expressive range analysis. And what we're expecting to see is to find it clumped in one corner of the expressive range histogram. And it's almost done. There we go. So you can see this is at the right-hand end of the x-axis, so it's high openness and it's low density. And even here there's quite some drift around the area, but you can see kind of the center of that mass is exactly where we asked it to. And what that is that's Danesh looking for configurations of this generator that meet the requirements that we asked for. And you can even do things like tell it not to touch a particular parameter that you want to be just so. So there's a lot of customization that you can have in this. Thanks very much for watching. This wasn't designed to be a tutorial, it was really just supposed to be me showing you what Danesh can do right now, and I'm sorry if it was a bit rambling and all over the place. I'll be cleaning this up with some cool tutorials and blog posts in the coming months, and that will hopefully clarify things much, much better. But I'm really excited about Danesh. I want to work with people, I want to try it out on people, and I want to hopefully produce something that's really, really useful and a lot of people can get value out of. One final point. I said that I wanted this tool to be accessible to novices. I know that right now it is a mess of complicated terms and difficult user interfaces, but we will be fixing that as the project goes on for sure. It's not something I've forgotten about or I'm deluded about. It's definitely on the menu. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to contact me about this, I am at MTRC on Twitter, or mike@gamesbyangelina.org will get you there. And you can read more about Danesh at gamesbyangelina.org. And I'm hoping to have the tool available for people to play with very soon. Thanks for watching. Cheers.